Before we jump into today's episode, a quick word from our sponsors. This podcast is all about improving your reptile husbandry. However, I know not everybody has the time or the money to go out and spend thousands of dollars doing custom builds. Thankfully, friend of the podcast, Josh Halter, aka the Bio Dude, is working hard to make better care more accessible. He makes turnkey bioactive kits for leopard geckos, ball pythons, tortoises, invertebrates, dart frogs, and the list continues to grow. He has spent years testing and perfecting these handcrafted substrates and dietary supplements to create the most effective products. If you visit thebiodude.com, you will see he is a proud supporter of both USARK and responsible reptile keeping, and there is an option to donate to either at checkout. Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is DILLON, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Today I'm speaking with Nick Stacey. You may recognize Nick from his Instagram page, indicator_species. Nick works with a genus of toad called Atelopus, and he is one of the first person to breed one of the species in captivity, and he walks us through how he did that. And this is one of those incredibly detailed people who successfully bred something that was incredibly challenging, and even the species themselves were considered to be challenging to keep, not only breed, but he was able to do both. So he walks us through how he did that successfully. And then the latter part of the conversation, he tells us all about the zoo, the wildlife park that he is building in Texas with his partner. Such a fascinating story. I think for many of us, it really is living the dream. If you were to ask your 8-year-old self, maybe one of the things that you would want to have done is make a zoo, and that's what he's doing, and it's incredible. So we talked about the species he keeps, how he manages it, how he's actually constructing and building the zoo, and what he has plans for in the future with it. It was just a fascinating conversation, and I cannot wait for you to hear it. I will say one thing, you may hear my voice being slightly raspy. It is spring allergy season, and it's really affecting me this week, so I apologize if my voice sounds a little bit different than normal. But without anything else, let's just jump into the episode. Enjoy.
Cool, yeah. So a little bit of background. My name is Nick. I'm one of the founders of Fragile Planet here in South Texas. We're a new zoo that's slowly opening up. I've always loved animals. I know it's the classic thing. Some of my idols, Steve Irwin, Jeff Corwin, a lot of the original people that worked with wildlife on camera. I don't do a lot of personal camera stuff myself. Eventually I might do more, but I kind of just really focus on the animals and stay in my own little world. I started working with animals at a really young age. At about 10 years old, I started volunteering at an exotic animal sanctuary in northeastern Oklahoma. They had everything from big cats and primates all the way down to little frogs and turtles and snakes, native species and exotics. The owner there would go to the reptile shows and stuff, and I kind of just did whatever I wanted there. I cared for the large cats, I cared for the reptiles and amphibians and stuff, and honestly, some of the original draws and stuff were the big cats. I've got a lot of large predator experience and stuff, but I kind of fell in love with the little tiny indicator species, if you will. It's like my namesake there on social media. It's just things that not a lot of people see, so I just really like to focus on that and show everybody about it. They're the non-charismatic megafauna, if you will. So from a young age, I got to work with things like alligators and crocodiles, large constrictors, and even some of the little pocket pets, bearded dragons and stuff like that, leopard geckos and stuff, right off from a young age. So I wasn't able to have animals right off the bat. I had to convince my parents that I was able to properly care for them, had the knowledge, did research. I used to make the little trifold poster boards with all kinds of information on them and stuff, write little books out and stuff, care manuals and stuff like that, save all kinds of files on the internet for my parents to look over. And when I was probably 11, it was probably a year after volunteering at the sanctuary, I was able to get a green iguana. So that was that started it all. They're one of the most commonly available things, and they're not something that people realize you can get in over your head really quick. They are a very fast growing large lizard, and they eat a lot, and they can be very defensive at times. They can defend themselves very well. So right off the bat, I had a lot of learning curves and stuff like that. I've been scratched.
How did that experience go? Like, did it start out well? And like you said, it's a lot of animal for most people.
Yeah, I'd say it did start off really, really strong and well initially with a little green hatchling. But the moment he got some size and got a little rowdy with sexual maturity is when the major learning curves started to happen and stuff. Even though it's an animal you've raised and you trust and stuff like that, sometimes they can get defensive. May not be towards you, but it could be another one of your pets or a different person in your life. My iguana did not like my mother or the cats that we had in the household. The cats would go up near the light and try to take the heat away and stuff. And the lizard would flick his tail and deter him. And anytime my mom was around, he'd threat display. He'd fill himself up with air and he'd make noise and he'd have his dewlap out and he just seemed real irritable. But anybody else, it was fine. And I always contributed it to perfumes and stuff like that. So with the large cats, that's something that can trigger them real readily.
Yeah.
With the reptiles, not so much. They do have some olfactory senses and stuff, but it's not quite as much as a drastic reaction with the large cats and stuff too. That was more of my scapegoat to stay away from my lizard. You're making them angry and stuff. So.
And then did you get into keeping some other things as well? I mean, you didn't stop
actually, with. Once I'd say I got confident. Once I figured out how to get a larger habitat, you're not reaching into this smaller tank with this animal that's feeling a little enclosed in his habitat. It was a little better to walk into the space with the animal and stuff. And once I figured that out, I was able to use some of that knowledge and branch into other species. I had some monitor species back in the day as well. I've got a couple smaller species now, but I jumped right in and got a savanna monitor right off the bat after the iguana. And then a couple larger species of snakes, reticulated pythons and Burmese. And those were actually adopted from the sanctuary I volunteered at. So they weren't animals that were in perfect condition. They were, rehomes. Some had nose rubs, some had scars from live feeding and stuff like that. But later on, that led into herpetoculture, and I wanted to get cosmetically perfect animals, and I wanted to produce animals as well for other people to enjoy too. So it kind of just branched out from that one green iguana, having some learning curves, using that learned information in multiple aspects. And honestly, being, I wouldn't say a laborer, but learning trade skills at a young age was astronomical as well. My dad and his friends doing various odd jobs. I used to go help, pay attention and stuff. So learning woodworking school tools, power tools and stuff like that, construction. I'm not an architect by any means or stuff like that, but learning how to build with structure for dealing with wind and stuff like that, or making sure animals don't dig out or climb out or don't have their habitat shift or crunch them and stuff like that, are all things that growing up and learning, and even as what's the saying? You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Anybody could learn something new. I'm still learning to this day. Just a couple years ago, I went and did the rock work course that Ty Park at Iguana Land when he first opened up. I've not done much for rock work yet, but I did do a nice concrete slab and a cinder block foundation building, and I used a ton of that knowledge I learned there for it. So, and it's just using some of the information I learned previously for something to keep advancing from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially when you get into keeping larger species, the ability to do some construction work is so key for sure. And then, so you were saying you started getting into breeding as well. What were some of the first species that you worked with as far as breeding goes?
Some of the first things I bred, probably some native species, actually. Some things like rough green snakes. I was able to set up a really nice outdoor habitat for them, real nice, big, fine screen mesh enclosure. So they had natural sunlight, natural plants. And it really helped being able to have bugs outside that they kind of ate. So you don't have to go buy bugs as so much to feed them. So that was really cool. Flipping over some bark on the ground and stuff and finding eggs from snakes I put in there after the previous season. So that was really, really cool.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's quite a difference from working with burms.
Oh yeah. So for the large snakes and stuff, it definitely took a little while to get in breeding with them. I actually, at a young age, going to the reptile shows and stuff in Oklahoma, there's a lot of large constrictor breeders there. So I was able to see some pictures of their setup and stuff like that. I used to lurk the old forums way back in the day, bobclark.com. You used to be able to go see different setups from breeders and pictures and stats, and you could get all their incubation temperatures and stuff like that, and all that crazy data, and all the cool pictures of the different morphs that were popping up in the early days of the morph race and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
For the big snakes, I had a couple clutches from retics. I never bred Burmese. Um, and it's dealing with the large cats and stuff like that. I kind of learned early on. It is hard moving a large number of animals and finding proper homes for them. So I
Right.
didn't keep breeding a lot of the larger animals. And I did like the education in-person teaching and stuff. So I tend to focus more on exhibition. I do some breeding, but I don't mass produce anything. And what I do breed changes seasonally. So animals have breaks and I have breaks periodically as well.
Right. Well, tell me a little bit about Atelopus, because this is where I first discovered you. Obviously, that was kind of your Instagram page was really focused on that. Now, you're doing all sorts of stuff. And I also talked to Natasha up in Canada. Well, in Canada, that's where I am. And she was I think the second person to successfully breed this genus. And I think you're being the first. It's a really fascinating story. So please tell me about where you first discovered this genus, and maybe give people just a little rundown of what we're talking about as well.
Like most of us in the animal trade, I go to all the different zoos I get an opportunity to, and some of the animals that are exhibited across the United States are an animal that's extinct in the wild called the Panamanian golden frog. It's actually a toad. They call it a frog because they didn't want to get it confused with the other extinct golden toad in Costa Rica. But the Panamanian golden frog is exhibited throughout accredited zoos in the United States. And they're the largest species of Atelopus. So I grew up seeing those across the United States at zoos. So I was just familiar with the genus. Learning about them in the trade and stuff like that, reading on Dendroboard, talking to other hobbyists and stuff like that before I even kept them, just getting into the frog hobby and stuff like that. They're incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? They have a very large stigma that they're incredibly hard to take care of, very sensitive and delicate animals. And to an extent they are, but similar to other dart frogs, there are a lot of easy aspects to them. So I kind of just was drawn to them just because I had seen them and been in love with them from visiting zoos in my youth and stuff. Finding a lab in Ecuador, Wakiri, that sells their lab surplus and stuff like that for conservation purposes was astronomical. A lot of animals that are captive bred reproduce already versus these wild caught animals that are sometimes harder to acclimate under human care. So that was a big stepping stone as well. And I'd say the major one was the willingness of other hobbyists to talk about their failures. I was able to compile a ton of information on just little details and stuff like that, on if people added leaf litter to their eggs and clutches and stuff like that, there was pause in developments or fungal and stuff like that, or tadpoles would perish and stuff. And one of my big things is I think that the mountain streams have lower tannins than a lot of these dart frogs in these smaller, almost stagnant like pools where leaf debris and organic matter builds up more. So I think tannins could cause an issue with all that extra organics in the water. So I do have really clean water for them. So it was kind of just having them be at multiple zoos throughout my life, visiting them. So the zoos kind of showed that they were an animal that was incredibly important for conservation because they're completely gone in the wild because of a fungal disease already. And considering how the whole genus is continually declining. And after I was able to acquire the captive bred frogs from the conservation organization Wakiri in Ecuador, I did want to acquire some of the wild caught frogs that are offered in the trade. The way they're collected, they do yield almost always males. They usually only find a female when they're in amplexus with a male already in the streams. The males make noise, so they're audible. They're easier to track down and find. You don't have to just see them, you can hear them. And I kind of just wanted to help curb the wild collection. Everybody had said they've always failed, and reading all the lab reports and stuff, Cologne Zoo had a big breeding project for it. It's all publicized and stuff. But in it, there's this little note, and it says how all their progeny failed to go through their color change, and they all had the SLS, the spindly leg syndrome, metabolic bone disease issue. And it could be tied to water quality and or food sources. So there's multiple factors into it.
So how many different species of Atelopus, like with the gold, the Panamanian gold frog, was that the first one? That was obviously the first species that you got.
Yeah, that's the very first one. So I don't have the Panamanian golden frog.
Oh, okay. So
those are not allowed outside of accredited zoos.
Gotcha. Okay.
The ones that I got from Wakiri is Atelopus balios, and then I have Atelopus elegans now, and then I have the purple toads, the Atelopus barbotonii. And then forgive my pronunciation on them. I didn't take any Latin courses or anything like that. So it's just what I've heard from other people saying that have been a little more educated than me and stuff, or my own interpretation to it.
Right. Okay.
And then I have a black and yellow species as well. And they were just labeled as spumarius, but they're almost identical to the barbotonii with their pattern, their call, and everything but their color. So I think there's a lot of information on them that we don't necessarily know, because not all of them come with the locality information from where exactly in the country of origin they get collected from.
Now, all four of those species, no one had successfully actually reproduced in captivity?
So Wakiri has bred their species regularly under human care.
Gotcha.
The purple toads is the ones that I kind of nailed and struck gold with for being the first. Other places have had spawns and had metamorphosis and stuff, but nobody's been able to rear them out of water successfully and have them survive long term.
And they're such a striking looking animal. I mean, they're really bizarre. The purple is so fake looking.
Their tadpoles are incredibly small, and they metamorphosize out incredibly small too, just a few millimeters in size.
So can you tell us a little bit about that process of trial? I'm guessing that you maybe had some failures as well working with them.
Yeah, I had some trial and error, some learning curves and stuff. One of them, I actually call it like the Pompeii syndrome. I went with a very large tadpole tank. In the world of water, the larger volume of water, the more stable it often is, and the less likely parameter swings can happen fast. It can still happen, tanks crash happen and stuff, but there's a little bit more leeway with the larger body of water. Temperature change happens slower, oxygen is lost slower, etc. So things just happen slower. So I have a 180-gallon tadpole tank.
Wow.
It's very intimidating and it's very fast flowing. That's a very large surface area. It's 3 foot wide and almost 8 foot long. So it is uncovered. So when they began to metamorphosize, it happened incredibly fast. Overnight, they just started kind of climbing out everywhere. And I didn't anticipate it happening that fast. I assumed, they'd pop their legs, I'd see them, and I could take them right out. And they had plans. They still had full-length tails and everything, and they were climbing out of the water. So that very first day for metamorphosis, when I came out, there was a couple of them up on the edge of the tank because it's open-topped. It's household humidity, and these little neotropical animals cannot survive in our North American household humidity. So there was, a couple of them that were dried up and in different positions, and everyone was in a little position. So they kind of looked like little Pompeii people. So that was the biggest learning curve. But once I figured out the emergence states and what to look for on the size when they start climbing out of water and stuff, I'm able to adjust for it and suck them out of the water and turkey baster them and get them into little smaller deli cups in the vivariums and habitats where they'll grow out from. So I don't have to worry about them climbing out and perishing.
So you still use that large of a, it's still 180, and that's just to keep the water clean.
Yep. So it's a very large environment. So it creates a large space for the tadpoles to naturally forage on, and it gives me my safety grace and my water parameters, because the tadpoles are incredibly sensitive for water parameters.
In the wild, are they found in quite fast flowing streams? Is that why you added lots of power to it?
There's not a ton of information on the tadpoles about them in the wild and stuff. But from where you find them in Amplexus, from a lot of the photos from the photographers and stuff like that, and the research papers where they found tadpoles, they have been fairly steep inclined, fast moving streams. And the toads seek out a nook and cranny that's kind of void of light, a little bit slower flow to lay those eggs. But once the tadpoles hatch and disperse, they're out in that flow. They suction cup in place, kind of like an algae eater, the Plecostomus fish, or the Odocinctulus. I don't know if I said that right either. So they kind of suction cup in that high flow and scoop along and rasp with their mouth parts to eat on that algae. So that large environment is also a really good exhibit. It's got some really nice water pumps that create waves going across it. So it's really cool for the public that come through on our tours and stuff to see the environment for them. So Natalie, Natatax in Canada.
Oh yeah, sorry, I said Natasha. Yeah, I meant Natalie. Yeah.
Yep. She did do it in a 40-gallon breeder tank, and she did serious numbers as well. So it is possible. Something I want to point out, the common denominator between us for the success with it is, I think, saltwater experience. We both have saltwater reef tank experience, and a lot of that is the balancing and managing the water quality for the tadpoles. Normal dart frog tadpoles, you can check the nitrogen cycle, you can check for ammonia, nitrates, phosphates, but you add tannins to the water and it helps buffer the water's pH and stuff like that. The kind of forgot where I was going with that.
I just talking about the tannins. I mean, I can imagine that you have dart frog people who are used to adding tannins into the tadpole water, and then they try to do that with the toads, and it's a disaster.
Yep.
Interesting. And then so you solved the problem of them emerging faster than you thought. Did you have any of the spindly leg issues that they were?
I have had no issues with spindly leg syndrome with the Atelopus. I did have a single issue with some oophaga early on, but I contributed that to having too many deposit sites, and the single female was raising too many progeny at once, and she was kind of spreading her feeder eggs thin between them because they were metamorphosizing a little bit smaller than an average large obligate frog would.
Gotcha.
Once I removed the extra lay sites and she consolidated her eggs and feedings to a minimal number of tads, it corrected itself immediately. The next generation, the next progeny.
Gotcha. So with the Atelopus, I think one of the things that Natalie was saying that I think is probably the genius part on your side is one of the issues is feeding the tadpoles, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, and you already mentioned how tiny they are. So maybe tell us about why that's a problem, like how the challenge of feeding such a small animal, and how did you actually overcome that?
So they're incredibly sensitive to water parameters, and when you add artificial foods to water, it essentially starts decomposing incredibly fast. It's not like a living animal that you're putting into the water. It's a food that's kind of just sitting there. So it starts degrading, and you can have a spike in parameters, just an incredibly sharp, fast spike from food degrading in that water. And the tadpoles are similar to corals in their sensitivity. So if there's swings in it, it can cause deficits for them. And it may not be an issue right now. It may be an issue later during their metabolic process when they metamorphosize. So keeping incredibly stable water parameters is very important. So you've got to control what you feed while balancing the water parameters at the same time. It could be as little as, adding a couple feeding stones too extra, and you can cause the water to foul a little more than you want to. And that can affect pH. It can affect the dissolved oxygen level. It can affect many different things, including an ammonia spike, which would be disastrous.
Right. So how do you solve that? How do you feed them without screwing up the water quality?
For my case, it is the large volume of water as a safety net.
Okay.
I have a large beneficial bacteria colony in that environment, so it can deal with any extra food in it, and not leaving the food in for an extended period of time. I put it in the morning, and by the end of the night or the next morning, I take it out. I don't let it sit in there any longer than absolutely possible. Even if there's still food on it and stuff, I'll scrub it off and I'll let it dry out, and I'll reapply the food paste to it and then let it dry out before I feed it again. So that's one of the things to mitigate that. I also run some media in my filters, just in case there is a spike. That media can help absorb it and counteract it as well. And that's just replaced and replenished periodically as it expires or is needed.
And then for the food paste itself, is that something that you just create?
So I have added some stuff to it that are like my own tweaking to it, if it makes sense. But it is one of the bases from what the zoos do for the Atelopus zeteki, the Panamanian golden frogs. There's a ton of awesome information that the accredited zoos put out, and it's really cool to go read through all that. Some people may recognize the names too, because they're people that are in the zoo field and in the hobby trade as well that are doing some of the studies and stuff too. So if you ever look up some of the Atelopus papers, keep your eyes peeled on the names for them. So it's cool to see people you may actually know that are doing the research.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And so, I mean, I imagine it must have been pretty exciting when you had those first froglets.
Yeah, I definitely jumped around a little bit, and I didn't get my hopes up at first too much. I posted about it after a couple weeks when I knew the eggs were fertile and stable. But I knew that just because I had eggs and tadpoles doesn't mean I was going to have healthy animals out of water. But after a month or so of the first ones climbing out of water and I saw they had good, strong legs and they started feeding right away, I was pretty stoked and hopeful that I was going to do good with the project. So I was very, very excited.
And I imagine the fact that Natalie had success as well probably makes you pretty excited, knowing that your system is something that can be replicated.
Honestly, I was equally, if not more excited. I'd say I'd tickle pink about having another person to do it, especially with my progeny too. And then just this last spring right now, my old vet from New York, she's here in Texas now, up north near Dallas. But she got some from me, and she's got some metamorphs climbing out of water with good legs right now too. So that's the second round with them. That's another one in the United States, which is super, super cool.
That's amazing. And can you tell us just a little bit about the care of the adults? Is it very similar to dart frog care, or are there things that you're doing differently?
I'd say the caring for the adult Atelopus, even juveniles, it's exactly the same for dart frogs. Not hot, not cold, just kind of ambient temperature, humid planted vivarium. They appreciate a good layer of leaf litter and some arboreal space. They definitely like to climb. They definitely like to forage through the leaf litter. I do not have any water features in the tanks that I keep them in permanently throughout the year. All the water that they are exposed to, I do manage like a fish tank and track the parameters too, just because there's bugs that die in it and stuff like that. And I don't want there to be any issues with the water parameters. I think that's just like the fish nerd in me. I like clean water.
Yeah.
What else is there?
As far as diet, that's all kind of the same sort of fruit flies and whatnot.
I think that's what I was going to touch on now. It's a base of fruit flies and small crickets. Occasionally some itty bitty tiny roaches and stuff like that if you can get them. Down where I'm at, I'm real lucky because we have a ton of different spider diversity down here. So I can collect eggs, like little egg casings from orb weavers and stuff like that. And they really like to pick at the little tiny, like they kind of look like boba. It's like a little bulb with little legs on it that wiggle. It's like a preformed spider. So they really like to eat those. Fruit fly larva is a real big one. If you get like a fine mesh strainer, like the coffee strainers and stuff, you can rinse out some media from your fruit flies and get the fruit fly larva, and that gets their attention real well. And it's honestly the same. Breeding is different, and the tadpoles are incredibly different. Breeding is kind of in between tree frogs. They need a riparian type setup and raining water. The main difference between the tree frogs and the Atelopus, I recommend having a clean source water to rain on top of them and to not recirculate the basin water on top of them, because that basin water has bacteria in it. It's cycled water. And the water that they would deal with in the wild that's precipitating on them. There may be some biofilm and bacteria from the leaves and stuff like that, but it is, clean precipitation water. It doesn't have a lot of bacteria like a cycled aquarium would. I always like to say our little glass boxes are kind of confined. We feed in them. They're going to be a little bit more dirty than the wild in the big open space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I try to keep it as clean and uniform as possible for them.
The best part about providing high-quality reptile husbandry is you get to develop a long-term relationship with your animal. Meet Jackson, my 18-year-old crested gecko. Jackson lives on the BioDudes Terrafauna substrate, which is one of their substrates that's specifically designed for warm biomes and humidity spikes. Like all other BioDudes substrates, it contains organic content to help support the plant life in Jackson's vivarium. It also holds moisture very well, which means humidity is never an issue, even in my dry climate. Another favorite of mine is the BioDudes Bug Grub. This is a supplement powder made from natural ingredients like carrots, beets, spirulina, oats, and potatoes. Everybody knows how important gut-loading feeder insects is, and this simplifies it for me and allows me to be confident when I feed both Jackson and my tarantulas that they're getting the nutrients they need to thrive. Also, if you have a lot of babies right now, this is a great way to help fortify the diets of neonatal reptiles. The BioDude has a ton of great educational content on both his YouTube channel and the website, all about bioactive care, and it's just one of those brands that's doing their part to push herpetoculture into a positive direction and give reptile keeping a better name. So how do you accomplish that? You have a rain chamber of some sort and it's raining into the basin, and the basin just drains out somewhere?
A riparian type tank. So it's an Exoterra tank with a modified lid, mostly glass with a small vent above the doors, keeps the doors clear. It helps circulate air between the bottom of the doors and the top. There's a few inches of water across the bottom, and I've got a UV canister filter on it. And there's no substrate, so it's just rocks, glass, and some plants and branches above it. So the toads are able to be arboreal above the water. They can hear it splashing and trickling down, and when I spray, it mists and drips from everywhere. And when they want to go into amplexus and lay eggs, they're able to go underneath the rocks below the canopy and find a nice nook and cranny in that flowing water to deposit their eggs. And it does take them a little while. They're a little bit picky, so having ample places for them to choose from is very beneficial.
Yeah. It's one of those projects that you have to be very in tune with what you're doing and focused on it. And there's too many steps that you can mess up to do it kind of like half.
Yeah. So a lot of the research that went into it, a lot of people, when they were trying to breed them, they always try to time it up with the seasons that you see that they're in amplexus in the wild and stuff like that. But people haven't been able to often get them to regularly release their eggs. And sometimes holding on to their eggs too long while they're in amplexus can cause issues. If the female's not in a breeding situation, I've never had an issue with them retaining eggs and stuff like that. It's only ever been if they've had a male and they just don't find a suitable like deposit site. I've never had one die from being egg bound or anything like that. But I have seen it in zoos, and I have seen it in other private people from their animals, wild caught and captive bred from various sources too.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It sort of reminds me of a few years ago I recorded, and I talk about this episode all the time because it's so fascinating. I recorded a podcast with a group of people in Texas actually who are breeding hermit crabs, and that is like real
is her
intense.
Name Mary, or is it someone else?
Her name is Darcy, and they have a channel.
I think I've seen her posts too.
I'm sure you have. Yeah,
there's one named Mary, and I think she was one of the first ones to do it.
Yes, yeah. Mary was like her mentor, Darcy's mentor, and Darcy's daughters are doing it as well. And it's just one of those. Again, it's a labor of love. It's dealing with microscopic, tiny little things that you're feeding and raising up, and so it's really cool that you were able to accomplish that and add a really beautiful species to the captive care or captive husbandry, captive herpeticulture to like you said, alleviate some of the wild collection, and what a beautiful species for us to appreciate in captivity.
Yeah, it was really cool. I read a bunch of Mary's posts and stuff, and I believe it is the people here in Texas. I believe I follow them and read their stuff too. It's really cool to see just these random hobbyists and stuff, and you wouldn't think just hermit crab hobbyists would come out of the nowhere and do some of these. It's almost essentially world first projects and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
People, places, and institutions have not done good at, and these people are flourishing with it.
Yeah, that's what I find amazing. You put that in a private setting, and suddenly you have people who are doing the things that the zoos are having trouble pulling off. It's incredible, and I think up to this point, people will be well aware of how passionate you are and how in tune with the every little thing you're doing, every detail when it comes to animal care. You also have a massive project going on that's not as small as breeding toads. Not that breeding toads is small, but what you're also up to is this incredible, essentially a wildlife park. Can you?
I like to joke around and call it my pre-existing condition. So before getting into all the different amphibians and stuff like that, I've always done the educational outreach stuff. So right out of high school, I got the federal permits to exhibit wildlife in the United States under the Animal Welfare Act. It's what used to be just mammals. This year, they did add birds to it as well. So I've got the same inspectors as all of the public zoos here in Texas. Gladys Porter, Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Fort Worth, all of them. Any of the facilities that are open to public and exhibiting wildlife, native or exotic, have these federal permits. And for a long time, we just used the permits for outreach, education purposes, and to maintain the collection of animals, the legality of them. We were in New York. New York's a banned state, so you're not allowed to own these animals as pets. So a lot of the animals were strictly for education or for conservation breeding purposes. So, you can't have a pet monkey and stuff like that. So some of the primates we had were relinquished pets and stuff like that. and it's easier to give them a permanent home than to bounce them around all over the place and find the different exhibit where they'll settle in with. Some of
Sure.
them don't settle in with animals. We've got a capuchin that was an ex-pet. Her teeth are taken out. She was raised by people. She's imprinted. She doesn't wash herself like a normal monkey. She doesn't clean herself. She's always relied on a person doing that. So we actually have to keep her alone because she self-mutilates when she's around other monkeys. That's something
Wow.
that we're able to give a great home for that a large public zoo wouldn't be a good fit for. They're more fit for the wild type animals that, you know, if they breed them and for their conservation purposes, if they need to put them back into the wild, they're able to do that. Now, not every individual animal can meet that criteria. And, you know, it doesn't make sense just to euthanize them because it wasn't their fault they're in that situation either. So we're
Exactly.
going to give her a home for the rest of her life. And that's Angela, our white-faced capuchin monkey.
That's
So, but
amazing.
once the pandemic hit, it kind of changed everything. It was a little bit scary. Our business model was outreach programs. That's what we did. We didn't do tours on site or anything like that. We went to schools, we went to community events, we did some birthday parties and stuff like that. We did a lot with scouts and the different child organizations and stuff with the badges and stuff like that too. And just the local community as well, rehabilitation and stuff. And the government was kind of like, you can't do anything at all. You need to take care of your animals, and that's it. No business, nothing, no exhibition, no gatherings. It made sense, but it was nerve-wracking.
This was still in New York, right?
We were actually in the process of moving to Texas.
Okay. And how many animals did you have at that time, just so people can visualize so what you're trying to maintain?
About 150.
Okay.
So some large, some small. It was a mix between them. So it was, two vehicles driving down. It took multiple stops. We drove mostly at night, parked in the shade, and monitored and worked with the animals and stuff throughout the during the daytimes. Most of it was also doing logistics. We were traveling with threatened and endangered animals that are on federal permits. So all the different places we traveled through on the road, we had to contact to make sure we were in all legal channels with it. We don't want to get pulled over and have, an ocelot in the wrong county or state and not have the proper permit to have that animal in that area.
Right.
So
Wow.
that was a bit to deal with, but the government was very willing to work with it and everything. Everybody oftentimes is very scared of them. As long as you communicate proper and stuff, there's always outliers where there's issues and stuff like that. But in my almost 15 years with being federally licensed and working with the government, knock on wood, it's been pretty smooth so far.
Wow, that's amazing. So the commute happened. You made your way to Texas, and I guess this was still inside the pandemic.
Yeah, so there was no pandemic when we started the trek down.
Okay,
and then
gotcha.
Right about when we went to buy the plot of property, we leased when we first moved here. But right about when we start to buy a plot of property is when the pandemic hit. So it kind of put us in a big crunch of a situation. We had some projects go down and fail and had to revision, revitalize, or redo things and figure out our situation. And one of the big drives for it, a lot of our friends that are in this industry as well, they had safari parks and they did not have to cease operation. People were able to stay in their cars and go through the safari parks quarantined essentially. So them and their families. So that was a really cool situation. So that's something that we wanted to venture into. So we had the federal permits for it already. So we started doing the research for it, started talking to our inspectors, other people that got it, and we hit the ground running. So we've been, I'd say, open to public for almost 3 years now, but it's been by appointment only. We've been doing a lot more facility construction in the last year or so, but the more I do construction, the less I do with amphibians. We have gotten a nice group of employees. We've got a couple of zookeepers now and a handful of educators and an office assistant. But I still primarily do a lot of the very sensitive things, the indicator species, any of our venomous and anything that would be considered inherently dangerous right now. Just for insurance purposes, as people are learning and getting trained. Some of our staff are green. Some of them are from other zoos and wildlife organizations and stuff. But with it being me and my other halves and we have a business partner now, our responsibilities, we are making sure we go slow and take things properly and stuff. We don't have volunteers currently and stuff. That's hopefully going to come in the next year or so once we get some more on-site facilities and stuff. But I'd say the pandemic was a big drive for becoming open to public and ending our private endeavors with just helping wildlife and enjoying the trade and stuff like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And can you give people sort of a bird's eye view of what the park looks like? Like, what would it be like if they were a guest there? Kind of how you have it laid out, and
So
then maybe some of the
we
animals as
are
well.
mostly all still open land that can be turned into a zoo. We're 32 total acres. Currently, right now, the gift shop building's almost done. We just finished up the floors, the walls, the electrical, the fan and lights and stuff like that in it. We've got some huge walls put up for the safari park. They've got real nice, it's like jig-jag cut. So they're different heights staggered and all a different angle across the top. So it looks real cool. We're going to have a gem mine put in. So like a water sleuthing mine so people can go through and dig out gems and sleuth through that there in the safari park as well. The road through the safari park is almost a mile long, if not just a little over a mile. And to start, it will be a wagon ride with our tractor and wagon. It holds about 40 people. And we will eventually work towards having it be a drive-through safari with people's own vehicle. But it does take a lot of research to get there. We need to go through the proper channels, check out with the insurance agents and stuff like that. And we just don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. So we're just taking it nice and slow.
And so right now, for people that do show up, it's an appointment basis. Do they still remain in their cars type thing?
So you're not able to drive up and come the same day. We do request that you call ahead. That way we can schedule for a tour guide to be here. Some of our zookeepers are tour guides, but we do have education department that does a lot of the education material and the tours and stuff too. So with there just being a handful of us, we just have to make sure to schedule it in and not cause a deficit on our animal welfare care for the day and stuff like that. We don't want to put ourselves in too big of a crunch. You know, most animal places always are feeling understaffed and stuff, and we're no different than any of those other facilities. There's always something needing to be done.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, that is just such a gargantuan task. It's not like having a big reptile room. It's having, there's a lot of responsibility there. Can you tell us some of the species that you are working with at the park?
In the safari park, we have Bactrian camels, emus, water buffalo, Watusi. We've got peacocks. Everybody loves peacocks. I love peacocks. I like their feathers. I love to give the feathers to kids and stuff like that. The little biofacts to take home.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to get at different zoos and stuff like that was peacock feathers and stuff. We have Pierre's David deer, which is an endangered semi-aquatic species of deer, which are really cool. They've got some really cool vocalizations. You can hear them all the time. We have a donkey as well. A lot of people are always like, why do you have a donkey? Donkeys are actually great livestock protection animals.
Yes.
He keeps any stray dogs away. He keeps coyotes and stuff like that, or foxes that could be testy for some of the animals or babies and nests and stuff like that. So they're very vigilant at protecting their area, their herd, and their other hoofstock friends. So we're going to try to get zebras soon. We have a nice little internal pen in the safari park. Zebras can be kind of butt heads to the other animals when they've got babies and stuff. So we're going to have them separate. And that's kind of the basis for the safari park right now. We'll get some other ground birds. I want to get guineas and stuff like that are vocal. They'll help scatter the manure around that we don't pick up, the little bits and pieces and stuff like that the dung beetles will get. They also help keep down on the flies and stuff like that, and the little insects that can be issues, ticks and stuff like that. But it's not a huge safari park like some other places. There's some huge ones up near San Antonio that, they've got almost hundreds of acres for turnout yards and smaller exhibit drive-through areas and stuff. So we're about 12, 13 acres or so with a safari park. So that's about all of the animals we'll have in it. There's one or two of each. They may have progeny. If they don't, it's not a big deal. We don't want to overwhelm the property. We don't want to have a dust bowl to happen where they eat all the grass and it gets too dirty. And for some other animals, we do have some smaller habitats. They're a little bit more of temporary situations. Some of them are permanent. We're still under construction. So, some of my turtles and stuff like that, the little babies are moved inside and out every day, just so they can get some good natural sunlight and stuff. But I don't want a possum or a raccoon or something like that to get them. I don't have a permanent setup with hot wire around it for a lot of those littler baby animals and stuff like that. But we've got some foxes outside, porcupines, some smaller primates and stuff. Asiatic small-clawed otters on exhibit as well. Angela, the capuchin, she's out there. She loves it when a group comes by and gets her rowdy. She likes to bash her bowl on the ground and get everybody's attention. And we've got some simple things too. I say simple. They're one of my most fearful animals. We have horses. I've been kicked and bit by horses, and even though I work with all these exotics, it was some of my worst injuries. A horse bite, they're not the nicest things, and getting stepped on and kicked. So I'm very wary and timid around those large animals.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I can imagine. And when you were driving down, you had mentioned ocelots. Do you have other cats as well, or do you have ocelots?
So we do have ocelots. Right now, they're not in Texas with us. They are on loan currently to other zoos at the moment for breeding or just exhibit and stuff. We don't have the state zoological permit for all of the native species exhibition here in Texas yet. To get that one, you kind of have to build everything and have them come and inspect it first. And we don't want to just throw some random habitat up. We want to wait until we're structured, ready to build the proper exhibit to do that. So for us to operate right now, we don't need that Texas permit until we get those native, threatened, and endangered Texas specific species.
That makes sense.
So we've got our references and the paperwork drafted and lined up for it and ready. We've had our communications with the state and all that. But like I said earlier, we're trying to be patient with it all and do it right.
Yeah, and I can only imagine. I mean, it's got to be so much work. How does one acquire these animals for the zoo? Like, how do they actually acquire them, and B, how do you decide what it is you want to bring in? I'd like to take a quick break to thank today's show sponsor, Damascus Limited. Damascus is an independent animal and husbandry consultant as well as a research and development consultant. Thomas works behind the scenes to help improve lighting technology for everything from just a keeper like you and I all the way up to really high-level zoos. Thomas has an incredible amount of experience from testing lighting technology all the way to actually making sure it's implemented properly in the field, which makes him uniquely positioned to give lighting advice for animals in captivity. He works with all taxa, ranging from small reptiles and amphibians all the way up to large mammals. He is trusted by zoos, vets, and the world's leading manufacturers. This allows him to offer professional and friendly advice tailored specifically to your needs, knowledge, and budget. Damascus also covers continued professional development and training for those of you who work in a pet store, a vet clinic, or a zoo environment, and all advice given is protected by insurance. Thomas is available for both in-person and virtual consultations. If you're looking for more information on Damascus, make sure you head to Damascus.com. That is TOMASKAS.com.
So a lot of it is personal preference for deciding what to bring in. We do have somewhat of like a animal management or collection plan, if you will. We're not going to go get a tiger tomorrow, even though we can talk with our inspectors and we could build something. And technically, you can't have a tiger privately in the United States now. You do have to hold a federal permit. What do we have? That federal permit. It doesn't mean you can go get a tiger just because you have that permit. You have to talk with your inspectors, build and be prepped with your veterinary for it and stuff like that. But a lot of it is communication network, proving and showing you're able to care for and you're educated about these animals. Like I mentioned, just a veterinarian is a big part of it. One major aspect of that federal permit is a PVC, provision of vet care, which means that you have what is called an attending veterinarian. They don't have to be on your staff and payroll. It is a vet you pay when you need to use them and stuff. But you have to have a vet that's willing to see your animals. You can't just have these animals and use whatever vet you deem necessary that you want to find or think that you can afford at that time. It is a little bit more strict than that. So you can use different vets, but they do have to communicate with your specific attending veterinarian too. Right. So we have a really great vet. He's a traveling vet here in Texas. But we have some local vets that we use as well if he's not, right here at that moment. So we're able to get prescriptions, stuff locally without a problem. If there's an emergency, we've got a vet clinic that can come here or that can go to as well. And then our attending veterinarian comes periodically to go through and do all of our rounds, our vaccinations, knockdowns, things like that. And the general physicals and stuff like that. So there's probably 5 or 6 different vets that we use total though.
Wow.
and they all communicate with each other too.
And is there like a marketplace for registered, like federally approved zoos to purchase
Not quite
animals?
a marketplace. Between a lot of the different private zoos and the public zoos, there are surplus lists that make their way around and stuff. Um, but a lot of it is like for genetic purposes. So the demographics that are tracked on the animals and stuff like that that are specifically sought after, if that makes sense. Where some of the animals we have, we actually got them because they're considered surplus. They've got a lot of genetic representation. So we're kind of just giving a space holder for them. Later on, if something happens, and the population changes and some of the group that are related ages out and dies out, then we could use them for breeding and stuff. But for now, they're just kind of living their life out here with us.
And I guess with the Texas climate, you're pretty safe to have. I mean, I know Texas has quite a few invasive species from different parts of the world and Africa and whatnot. So you're actually probably fairly safe as far as weather goes.
I see Plecostomus algae eaters everywhere. Every ditch, every drainage pond, they're there.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's actually really nice with the climate. One of the reasons we left New York was the harsh climate, a lot of the pressuring regulation and changes and stuff like that. And we chose South Texas because of the ocelots. Why not? If we were going to move and we were able to move across the country and redo and start up our presence in a new community, why not be right where the native species are, if that makes sense? One of our focal species is the ocelot. So I've always liked Texas. I've always liked the southern United States. I grew up in Oklahoma, so it's very similar down here, even though I'm 12 hours south from where I grew up.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit what it's like working with an ocelot? Like, what is that? I mean, I think most people know what they are. They're like kind of like a small like leopard type thing. But what is it? How big are they when they're full grown? And what is it? What's that experience
They're about
like?
30 to 35 pounds full grown, maybe
Okay.
a smidgen heavier. A lot of cats under human care get the little belly pouch. They eat real good. Um,
Yeah.
they do get fast days if they do get a little too pudgy though. Not all the predators eat every single day in the wild. What is it? I would say it's almost surreal. Growing up, I'd never thought I'd be caring for an ocelot, let alone owning one. So it's absolutely incredible. Um, it's very rewarding, but it's a ton of hard work as well. You have to absolutely respect the animal. Even just playing around, they've got 4 handfuls of razor sharp claws and a mouthful of incredibly sharp teeth and a very strong bite to back it all up. Uh, there's a lot of being cautious. We were free contact with him when we did have him. Since he's been in the breeding situation up at the zoo, he's actually at Pittsburgh Zoo in Pennsylvania. They have not been free contact with him. He is a little bit bigger than the ocelot that they were free contact with prior. So their staff wasn't the most comfortable with him. He is a little abrupt, I would like to say. He's hand raised. He wasn't afraid of people. So he wasn't afraid. So he's a little bit different acting than the cats that they were used to and stuff as well. More approachable or confrontational at times, if you will. There's things you can and can't do with certain wild animals, and a lot of these large predators is messing with their food at all. But something zookeepers do is training, whether it be for medicinal purposes, habitat purposes, or just general training for animal mental health and stuff like that. It's good to keep them stimulated. We work with their food. It's one of the best rewards for them. You have to be incredibly careful. A lot of the injuries come from handling food. If you forgot you've touched something, we're working free contact, you smell like it still. You can't forget things like that. So keeping sanitizer on you or Sani wipes is a good habit to keep your hands clean and stuff. Not only that, we're working with animals. It's incredibly important to keep your hands clean too. We're primates too, so we're apes, but we use our hands for everything. We touch our face and our mouths. We got to be careful with what we touch with these animals for those zoonotic issues.
Yeah. I remember years ago I was watching something on Netflix about people keeping tigers privately. It wasn't Tiger King. It was something else. And I just remember a woman saying the big cats are basically just like your house cat at home, but they're just huge. And she said their behaviors are so similar. So if you're somebody who keeps cats like as a pet, domestic cat, those behaviors they're all very similar. But when you talk about a giant tiger or a lion, it's just obviously the consequences are much worse. Is that kind of your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The same instance where like even your house cat scratches you on accident. if you compare a house cat to a tiger, it's 100 times the size, a little scratch, but 100 times the scratch could be devastating. I have worked free contact with large predators. Myself, I do like to work free contact with the small carnivores and stuff. I socially raise large predators, but I would not go in with large tigers if I had them myself, just for the safety factor and stuff, and or the stigma if something were to ever happen. There is a lot of social media that happens when tigers get injured. Tigers injure people and stuff like that. So I wouldn't want to ever put the tiger in situation, my facility staff, or myself in that situation. So
Yeah.
I would be protected contact, but I'd raise the little ones.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense. It's like you said, even if they're just playing with you, it could create a devastating injury for yourself or worse. So, as you were saying, you're going to have a wagon eventually to pull people through the park to take a look at things. How far out are you from basically that happening?
It's kind of like crunch time right now. I've been working extra hours, extra hard, and any time I've been trying to work on out there and getting it done. We're shooting for the beginning of June.
Oh, wow.
It'll be open, if that makes sense, but it may not be 100% done. I know I'm not going to get that 1 mile road completely covered with stone and stuff like that, but I've got the path graded out and it all set and stuff, so I'm able to drive the wagon on it still. So there may be a little bit of an unfinished road for a section and stuff, but it's not gonna be able to not cause me to open and stuff. So it's just the little tiny things, the finishing stuff and things that I could be patient and do it, but we're being patient with enough things that the tiny little cosmetic things that my OCD might make me bother or might bother my OCD, we can let slide to get open in time. So one of the big factors this year has kind of just been the weather. It was a real wet winter, so I didn't get as much done this winter as I thought I was. And this spring has been incredibly dry, and that's normally when we're soaking wet and drenched. So my crunch time kind of got flopped. I was hoping to crunch it out this winter and be patient and do my finishing touches and cosmetic things when it was raining this spring, and I kind of got put backwards on it. But that's life, so we're making do with it.
Yeah. I'm sure there's lots of different factors that come up when you're owning a zoo. And a few weeks ago, you posted a picture on Instagram of basically a car flipped over from the fence, but you also posted it on April Fool's
joke.
Oh,
Yep,
was it April
yep.
Fool's?
That was my
Okay.
April Fool's joke for being open with the safari park.
Okay, yeah, because I was like, you posted on April Fool's, but then I read the caption, I'm like, but it also seems like he's serious, so I wasn't sure if that was like a legitimate
Yeah,
thing
there
or
was
not.
a little bit of both. I think I accidentally confused a lot of people with it. I guess it was inside my own head joke. Um, Everybody's been asking when we're open and stuff like that. So I thought it was somebody's car was in it before any of our own staff cars and stuff got to go in it. So I
So
thought
the
it
actual
was
accident did happen. That was not a
Yes,
joke.
yep. That was actually New Year's. We had all of the large animals locked down because we were doing construction. So the only thing out there were some emus and some smaller hoofstock and stuff like that. But they all kind of got spooked away from the lights and commotion. But New Year's, somebody was having a little bit too good of a time and decided to drive home under the influence. And they were going a little too fast. I want to say they were doing almost double the speed limit, which is 55, so they were going 90 plus miles an hour, and they went off the road through our field and hit the 8 foot high tensile deer fencing we have for our perimeter safari park.
Oh my
But
God.
I guess we built a really good fence because it didn't split our fence. It hit right on a seam too, where we connected two ties of wire. But it grabbed the car and flipped it like 40 feet into our safari park upside down. So
Oh
she
my God.
went for a little bit of a ride, a lot of mess. It was $20,000+ in damage. I have to like total up all the itty bitty things. It's probably 25 or 30 total. We had to scrape out a half acre of dirt that glass and oil scattered across from the car accident, shrapnel, plastic and stuff. There's so much of it. It was almost impossible to, pick it all out even by hand and stuff. So thankfully we got a big tractor and we were able to do a little bit of terraforming and rescape and pull out all that dirt and re-put new soil and grass seed down and stuff. And we were able to get some wire rushed in, and we got all the equipment to re-stretch that fence and stuff. And within 48 hours, we had it completely patched up and you couldn't even tell that a car flipped in it.
Wow. So was she okay in the end? Like she didn't get
Yeah, she
overly
was
injured?
fine. She was definitely shaken up, definitely inebriated.
Yeah.
Stepped out of her car. I was awake when it happened. It was actually almost 1 a.m. And I like went out there and I was walking up to the car in the field and the emergency services already had her getting checked out and she's yelling, "Who's that in the field by my car?" And they're like, "That's the property owner. He's wondering why your car is in his field."
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that is wild. So I assume that the damage was that insurance covered through? Like you didn't have to just
She was uninsured, so we had to eat
oh.
that out of pocket.
Oh
So
my
that was
gosh.
honestly one of the other things. A little bit of a big bit of a setback was chewing up all that out of pocket to fix it. It would have been
Wow.
more expensive if we had to hire out to fix it. So thankfully, we're able to do it in-house. We do a lot of our own construction and stuff here. Everything, almost everything's DIY. Some of the things I had to contract out, like the electrical and stuff like that. But I was there to watch it and learn how to do it too.
Right,
So,
right. So do
but
you
yeah,
feel
that was
like
a little bit crazy. It
yeah,
was
that is wild.
cool to
Going to
see our
expect that?
local law enforcement in action. They did an incredible job. Um, they were a little bit worried. They couldn't figure out what was happening. When they went through the fence to go rescue her, we do have an electric fence to keep the animals off that perimeter fence, and they kept getting zapped, and they couldn't figure out what it was because the wire was just in a little bit of a jangled mess with the fence there. So, but once I figured out that was happening, I killed the electric fence down so they could do their job a little better. So.
Well, and they're probably wondering like did we just release a bunch of animals or something?
Yeah, yeah. Well, thankfully, I was there in time. They had called us immediately as well. So that helped a ton. I think like by the time I was out in the field, the park phone was already ringing. So within just minutes they called too. So they were
Okay.
quick to contact property owners for that accident.
That is wild. So do you feel like you're living like 8-year-old Nick's dream right now? I mean, you're running a zoo, you're operating a
Absolutely,
zoo.
absolutely am. With it, there's some things like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of hoofstock, the large charismatic megafauna. But people love it. And doing some zoo stuff is it's not always what I like, it's what people like. So there has to be a balance with it too. So some of it is for the public attention and draw, and some of it are the animals I like too. So there's a balance.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And do you think down the road, like I'm sure right now you're focused on getting this thing open, getting it to the operational point, but do you think like 10 years down the road what this will look like or how it will evolve?
So we want to have the drive-through safari park and a walk-through admissionable zoo. So we want to be able to have somebody come walk through like they're visiting their local zoo and see all the animal exhibits and stuff. And we want the drive-through safari. One of the major things that's different from your average zoo that I want to keep doing with this by appointment only situation, you can't be on our property without one of our staff members with you. And that's one of the federal government's rules. Some of the barriers are small. We don't want you walking around them. We don't want you touching the animals without our supervision and stuff like that. So you have an attendant with you. When I was a little kid, I used to love going to all these zoos. And do you know how hard it was to find the right person to ask my question to? I had some very specific questions.
I bet you
Uh,
did.
so it was very hard. And, half my time was tracking down someone to ask the question to, let alone the right person to ask the question. So I want to offer guided tours all the time, always. You may have to wait for a group situation. It may not be a private tour, you and your family, but I want to offer a tour guide so you can ask your individual personalized questions to it. So you don't have to go hunt someone down at the zoo.
Yeah, and you know that tour guide's going to have the information that's going to answer like
Yep,
the
yep.
left
If,
field
if you want
questions.
to know some of the names of the animals and stuff like that, or what their favorite foods are, or a little bit of the backstory on the projects and stuff like that in the facility.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you have? I'm sure there are people listening who maybe have a similar vision of creating some kind of park or some sort of zoo situation. Is there any tips or advice that you would give to somebody who is wanting to walk down that endeavor?
It's scary, but it's not any more scary than anything new in your life. So if you're really serious about doing it, start the research. It's all out there. It's all public knowledge. The government's always willing to teach and learn. They don't want you doing the wrong thing, so they're gonna teach you and show you the right way to do it. Take your time, do lots of research, and talk to as many people as you can.
Yeah, I
So
think that
there's
that
never
makes sense.
too many opinions or too much information.
Yeah, and it's always good to find more people who are doing this sort of thing. I mean, there's so many examples of horrible, like roadside quote unquote roadside zoos that are
Yeah,
just a
roadside
mess.
views.
Like, so the more people that do this the right way, the better it will be for private zoos in general, right?
Yep, yep. And I'd be labeled a roadside private zoo, but eventually one day we would want to get accredited. We don't know if it would be AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums in the United States, or ZAA, the Zoological Association of America. But currently, those are the only two zoological accreditation associations in the United States that are approved by our government to do those breeding situations and stuff like that. So otherwise, you're just a private owner or a non-government organization if you're a nonprofit and stuff that you started.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. It's amazing watching that project develop, and watching it continue to develop into the future. I think is going to be great. Is there anything that we didn't mention today that you wanted to mention before we wrap up, Nick?
Let me take a peek at my notes real quick.
Yeah, please.
One more thing, just a touch about that roadside zoos too. Something a lot of people don't realize or don't know either. Every single one of those accredited zoos also started out the same way as every single other roadside zoo did. You cannot open a zoo already accredited. You have to open a zoo, meet the criteria, be inspected, and then get the accreditation. So all of the AZA zoos were once non-AZA. And a lot of them, there's city contracts and stuff like that. They have to be above the federal minimum welfare standard, which is the USDA Animal Welfare Act, like the class exhibitions for the mammals and birds now. So they want to see a little bit of a higher standard of that, and that's where the accreditation comes in.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, and that's the thing is, like, the roadside zoo always has a bad name, and that's because there are bad examples of that. But it doesn't mean that somebody can't go out and do a great version of that. And like you said, it is the precursor to the well-known institutional zoos that we know and love. Anyway, so it's not a bad thing to do or to pursue. Just doing it right is key.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Can you tell everybody where they can find your Instagram page? Please tell me the location of the zoo and the website and everything.
My Instagram is @indicator_species. That's my TikTok and my Reddit as well. My Facebook is Nick Stacey. My website is fpwildlifepark.com.
And I don't think we actually named the name. Like, it's Fragile Planet.
Planet Wildlife Park. Yep.
And where is it? I know it's in Texas, but where is it location wise?
We are in the Rio Grande Valley in Los Fresnos, Texas. So we're in the southern tier of Texas, all the way down by South Padre Island and Mexico.
Okay, awesome. So if anybody wants to potentially reach out to you to book a tour, and hopefully in the summer they can come, and the park will be relatively open to come check it out.
Or even in the winter, if you want to beat the heat, we've got real nice winters down here that are 50, 60 degrees.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me, actually. Well, Nick, this was fantastic. You are a brilliant person, and I can imagine just how much work you're up to, and you're probably eager to get back to building the zoo. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. We'll absolutely have to follow up with you again in a couple, in a year or two once the park is opened, and we'll see how it's going. So thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, too.
All right. That is the end of that episode. Nick, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast and taking time out of your incredibly busy day to tell us your story. I think the Atelopus section of this podcast really highlights how detailed and specific you are. And I think there is no question that the wildlife park will be a success because you have that integrity to actually want to execute things successfully. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Listeners, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. You, like me, will have to head out to Nick's Wildlife Park at some point and check it out in person. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider sharing it on social media, Facebook or Instagram. That really does go a long way to help support the show. You can also check us out at patreon.com/animalsathome if you'd like early access to the podcast. And of course, that does help me produce the podcast. Every single patron I'm so grateful for. You can also check out customreptilehabitats.com. There is an affiliate link in both the YouTube description and the show notes. If you make a purchase using that link, a commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. And that is it for this episode, everyone. Have a great week. My voice is really dying here. I will see you in the next episode.